The Capitals were looking to pick up 2 points, but they have to settle for 1 point as they fall in the shootout, but they do pick up a much needed point, and sometimes that's half the battle.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms, including the SiriusXM app and on YouTube. And I want to thank you for making this your first listen each and every day. My name is Dan Holney. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. And the best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. I would love to talk Capitals hockey with you one-on-one, and we can do that on subtext. Just check the show description for more details. Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for more details. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about how the Capitals were looking to pick up 2 more points, but they have to settle for 1 point as they made it to the shootout. We'll talk about that a little bit later. We will talk about how John Carlson was huge in his 1,000th game. And then a little bit later, we will talk about the Capitals' plans for the future. But just to get it going here, I was hoping that there was going to be a way that the Capitals would find a way to take down the Bruins. It was tough. The ice was tilted against the Capitals for a majority of the game. But what we've seen as of late is a pushback, a tenacity, a will that we can win games when we need to, but they fall short to the Bruins. But the good news, and it is good news, we need to remember at the end of the day, as they do pick up a much needed point. And one of the things that Ben Raby pointed out is the Caps are in 3rd place in the Metro for the first time since December 10th. So a huge thing for the Capitals that despite the fact that they fall in the shootout, they are sitting in a pretty good position as far as the playoffs are concerned. Boston scored first with a goal by Hampus Lindholm, and the Capitals were on their heels. And sometimes they struggle in those kind of situations to fight back. Oftentimes when the Capitals fall behind first, they often struggle. But they had an answer. And Michael Sgarbossa, who has been a huge piece for this team. If we can remember why he got called up in the first place, it's because Kuznetsov went into the players' assistance program. And one of the things that Sgarbossa had spoke of is he said that he thinks he's going to get an opportunity on the Capitals. He just wanted to be ready, and he has been ready and a solid contributor. Sgarbossa has been a great addition to this team, and I think he's making a case that the Caps should consider him as an option on the big team. Beyond just this season, Sgarbossa answered first by finding Twine and beating Swayman. So Sgarbossa is the one that is able to find the back of the net first for the Capitals and set them in the right direction. That was that positive momentum. And it was at that moment that I thought maybe there was a way they could get back into it. It was his 4th goal of the season. Talking about Sgarbossa, he is no stranger to the NHL. He is no stranger to the AHL. He is a guy that has been there and done that and kind of defies odds in a lot of ways. Is sometimes these guys that toil for lengthy periods of time in the AHL, sometimes they just can't get past that. But this is a guy that's had a will to win and patient. And what I said there is that he was going to be ready when the opportunity presented itself and has been a great addition. Taking a look at next season, I would have 0% worry about having him on the team on a regular basis. I think that the initial thought on Sgarbossa was that he was going to be a good Band-Aid until they figured out what the case was going to be with Kuznetsov, or until another player from Hershey comes in and, makes a case for himself. But Sgarbossa, once he was on this team, I think that he has solidified his place on this team in the long term. I guess unless he totally falls on his face, but all things considered, I like his game. The Capitals had a difficult time trying to get any momentum going because the Bruins were busy blocking almost every shot thrown in their direction. Boston blocked 29 on the night. Huge. And Swayman is a beast in net. Make no mistake about it. It's not often that your team is facing a double minor and the goalie has a smile on his face, almost the look of bring it on, I'm ready. Swayman is for sure one of the premier netminders in the NHL and is ultimately one of the big reasons that the Bruins are as good as they are. But the Capitals have no slouch in net either. Charlie Lindgren was huge. Lindgren ultimately kept the Caps in the game. Lindgren stopped 26 of 28 shots as the Capitals were outshot 28-20. And it was one of those things, like I spoke of, it was difficult. They had a hard time getting any momentum going, that it was difficult for them. Anytime they tried, even on the power play, they struggled to keep it in Boston's end. It was even on the power play, it was in their own ends, which was difficult. And ultimately why the Bruins are as good as they are, because they are a shutdown team and they can shut you down when they want to. Even if you are on the power play, they find ways, they have countermeasures to counteract whatever you throw in their direction. This was a more well-oiled machine Bruins team, I guess I'm going to say, than the last time the Capitals faced him. Dylan Strome was also huge, picked up an assist, and now has points in 7 of his last 8 games and a team-leading 61 points. Huge. Clutch for this team, has been all season. Even when Alex Ovechkin was snake bitten earlier in the season and he was getting assists, but he wasn't scoring goals, Dylan Strome was that steady Eddie, leading the team in goals for a lion's share of the season and just a key contributor. And Beck Malenstein, in Tom Wilson's absence, has been that bull in the china shop. Beck Malenstein led the Caps with 6 hits. An interesting player for the Capitals who's been in the Hershey organization for quite some time. Was going to get his opportunity earlier, but we know he got injured. But this season, it's been his. And because of that, there were a lot of teams around the trade deadline that were interested in the services of Beck Malenstein. Another piece the Capitals, I think, should hold on to. And later in the show, it's interesting that I talk about holding on to pieces, because I'll talk about pieces that potentially should be on the move. But Beck Malenstein, for me, is a really great Swiss Army knife, I guess I'm going to say. Blocking shots, scoring goals, a defensive flair, quite the dynamic player. The power play, all things considered, power play goals in 5 of the last 7 and 14 of the last 18. So, despite the fact of where the Capitals are, they are in it right now. And it's a good position for the Capitals to be in. If we take a look even, back to last month, they were in a much worse position. That the Capitals, the fans, everyone should feel pretty good about where this team is. It was all doom and gloom around the trade deadline. And before that the Capitals should be sellers, that they should probably just stick a for sale sign out Capital One Arena and say, we'll listen to bids on every single player. An about face. And a lot has changed on this team, and a lot that has changed is just due to, not things that were planned out, kind of coincidental. You take a look at Backstrom stepping away from hockey, and definitely that increased the role of Connor McMichael. Kuznetsov going into the Players Assistance Program lent an opportunity to Sgarbossa. It's also lent opportunities to see different players get their chance. Vincent Iorio's on the big team right now because Rasmus Sandin is out with an injury. We've seen Charlie Lindgren on this team, and, it's a different look team than the beginning of the team. And I think that's why it gives a lot of the insiders a moment of pause and like, well, what's going on with this Capitals team? I can't figure them out. On paper, they seem like they should be one of the worst teams, but they're getting it done. And I think that this year they will make it to the playoffs. How far they make it into the playoffs is another question, but a big night for the Capitals. Yes, despite the fact that they did lose, they did pick up a much needed point, and they're sitting in a good position. As of right now, as I record this at 2:30 local on Sunday, they are in a good position, and we hope that they can find a way to keep rolling and keep, earning more points so they can even be in a better position as the playoffs approach. All right, so coming up here straight ahead, we will talk about that despite the fact that the Capitals lost, John Carlson does what he does best. He eats up a lot of minutes and is just one of the key contributors on the Capitals blue line. And it was huge for him as it was his 1,000th game I'll discuss more about his great evening coming up. It's almost the end of the season, and let's face it, Capitals fans, there's been ups and downs this season. Regardless of where we are in the current standings, I want to remind you that you could win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. And let me tell you something, guys, I was not the kind of guy that was that big into fantasy hockey until I found Sleeper. And now let me tell you something. I love it. To win a 100 times bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me, Capitals fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code Locked On NHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. Watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all the shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you the can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So John Carlson has been one of the steady eddies on the Capitals in the NHL for years, and it was his 1,000th game last night as the Capitals lost to the Bruins. But despite the loss, he was big for the Caps, doing what he does best, and that's being a key contributor on a night in and night out basis. The Caps are looking to have all hands on deck, and it was announced before the game the Caps would be without one of their premier blue liners in Rasmus Sandin, and what the team announced as just a lower body injury. This is not just any blue liner. This isn't a third pairing. This is a key piece for the Capitals who plays a key role. So what does that mean? That means that John Carlson has to do what he does best and eat up a lot of minutes. This presented a great opportunity to get a good look at Vinny Iorio in a Capitals jersey for the first time this season. A guy that will no doubt have a future on this team, maybe even next year. He is a guy that we've heard rumblings about. We've seen him on this team before, but he figures in to be the future of the Capitals blue line, and I was happy that he was able to get his opportunity. In Sandin's absence, John Carlson does what he does best, and that is log heavy minutes. 30 minutes, 16 seconds while having 7 shot attempts. Huge, clutch. He was one of the guys that Mitch Love referred to as one of the other coaches, except he is on the ice, a guy that has a lot of experience, a guy that can serve as a mentor to a lot of the younger players on the team, and the older players alike. I think that they just respect him. A key piece on this team has been for many years. He also did one of the other things he does best, and that's score goals by scoring a power play goal. Yes, a blue liner that gets contributions and scores. That is what John Carlson does. It marked his 8th goal of the season and a 46th point overall, and he now has points in 7 of his last 8 games. Key, one of the untouchables on the team. Again, to reiterate, who are my untouchables? I would say it's Ovechkin, Wilson, and Carlson. That was 3 players that I came up with, I think it was last summer or so, that I said, hands off. Pretty much I would be willing to listen to offers on anyone else, but those are my 3 untouchables. Now, listen, that's always kind of a fluid situation. I guess if the Capitals had just a really great offer, well, my opinion could be swayed. But as it stands right now, those are my 3 untouchables. He is the second player in franchise history to score in his 1,000th NHL game. This was a game of adjustment for number 74, with the blue line being tinkered with in Sandin's absence. And, that was, I think, one of the biggest reasons last season why the Capitals were kind of flailing on the blue line, that when John Carlson took that puck off the head, it was against Winnipeg there, that there was a lot of questions. Who's going to eat up all the minutes that John Carlson, when he plays, who's going to eat up that amount of time? He left a big hole in the lineup, and at the time it was Gustafson and Trevor Van Riemsdyk. Those were the guys. But when John Carlson is on the ice, the Capitals are much, much better. So a key contributor and a really great nod to one of the best blue liners to ever do it in my assessment. And he played in his 1000th game, a true milestone for John Carlson. And we hope that there are many years ahead for him. As I'll talk about in the next segment, we're going to talk about planning for the future and facing difficult questions about what players the Capitals should view as expendable or trade pieces. I'm going to go ahead and say that John Carlson should not be one of those players. I think, like they talked about, what he does on the ice, his leadership role, and despite the fact that he's an active player, kind of almost serves as what Mitch Love said is a coach that plays out on the ice just because of the respect, I think, of all the blue liners and just the players in general. But a key piece for this team, and we hope that we have many more seasons of Carlson on this team. All right, so coming up here straight ahead, we will talk about how the Capitals are in a pretty good position right now. But do they keep putting themselves in a position that they're just good enough to get across the finish line and make it to the playoffs? Or should they kind of blow it up and make bigger plans for the rebuild and get it going full speed? I'll discuss straight ahead. The sports calendar is loaded, and FanDuel's making it even more exciting to get in on the action because right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet your money on MLB, NBA, NHL, and so much more. Visit fanduel.com/locked on and make your first bet a big win. Listen, oftentimes, guys, you're going to watch games that you're not that into. Open up the FanDuel app, put a little bit of money on the game. It makes watching the games that much more exciting. So go to FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, talking about the future of the Capitals, yes, the season is still going. There's a lot of optimism as it does appear that this Capitals team will make it to the playoffs after missing last season. So, what's the problem? We should just keep riding this pony out as long as we possibly can. But is that the right tactic to take? Many people have thought they should have rebuilded earlier. I've even heard rumors out there that the Capitals had planned on doing a rebuild around 2018, and then something crazy happened and the Capitals won a Stanley Cup, and subsequently they've held on to this lineup for such a long time. What do the Capitals do with their eye on the future? The Caps need to look at more of a long-term sustainable winning model if they have any plans of making a deep push into the playoffs. Again, there's always a lot of these, moves that are made like, okay, this player, if I add this, aged veteran, maybe that'll be enough to just get us over the hump of making it to the playoffs. But is just making it to the playoffs, period, enough? I have grander plans for this team. I not only want them to make it to the playoffs, I want them to do something crazy and win a Stanley Cup. Now, don't get me wrong. I hope the Caps dominate in the playoffs and even win a Stanley Cup this year. But the small moves to make this team just good enough is a bit frustrating. And I think you know what I'm talking about. We went through the trade deadline and it was quiet. It was crickets. There were subtractions from this team, no real notable additions. So it's a difficult position. I think that the feeling then was that the Capitals were out of it, that we should be sellers, all of that kind of thing. But there was kind of a change of heart, and I don't know if it was a change of heart just based on that there were no suitors for a lot of the players that Brian McClellan was looking to move. But Brian McClellan said that he had kind of a change of heart and he viewed this team as a contender. That's why Max Pacioretty is still here. That's why Nick Dowd and Charlie Lindgren, those players are still here. But what do we do on the future? Do we want to hold on to the likes of Dowd and Lindgren, even though we could maximize a return? An interesting question for the Capitals. At some point in the not so distant future, the Caps will need to rebuild and make this team more well equipped for a deep push. It's like adding new tires and rims to a car with 150,000 miles on it. It's good, but it's still an aging car. It's still an aging team that at some point is going to need to be replaced. So instead of putting the fancy rims and tires and the spoiler on the back, how about you do the right thing and replace it with a newer vehicle? Now, listen, I'm not saying here that they should trade out everyone, Ovechkin and Wilson, but what I am saying is take a look at the teams that are playing the best. Take a look at the Bruins. Take a look at, the moves that the Hurricanes made, for example. They made those moves and are now some of the best teams in the NHL. The Caps will need to determine which players are going to be a part of their long-term success and which people just stopgap measures until an inevitable rebuild that should have been done years ago takes place. And there are going to be tough questions and not easy answers about what to do with some of the players that we've grown to love. Would the Capitals ever entertain the idea of trading someone like a TJ Oshie? If the Capitals could get a tremendous return, would they ever consider trading John Carlson, despite the fact of, what I spoke about earlier in the show? One of the players, even though he's playing so huge on this team right now, I still view as a player that's going to be on the move this summer is Charlie Lindgren. I think the Capitals could maximize and get a huge return. He still has 1 year left on his deal, and I think he's getting paid like $1.2 million. $1.2 million for a goalie that plays that well. Surely you could fetch a big return. Ultimately, that is why I don't think that he was dealt at the deadline. I think that they could maximize the return around the draft or during free agency. It's just going to be interesting. And why? Why do I say that? Why would they move Charlie Lindgren, who's this great netminder? Well, the biggest reason is they have Charlie Lindgren currently sits number 1 in the AHL and Clay Stevenson as number 2. Many people have also asked, why not move Darcy Kemper? Well, that gets a little bit more complicated as there are a lot of years left on his deal and they're paying him a boatload of money. So I think the Capitals would be all ears on moving Darcy Kemper. I just don't think a lot of teams would like to take on the cap hit, especially considering how he's played here as of late. The blue line has been updated, but there's more work that can be done. What do the Capitals do with their older forward group? You know who I'm talking about. I'm talking about Oshie. I'm talking about, Nick Dowd and some of those players that even though they are key contributors, do you want to get something before you get nothing? Like I talked about with the analogy with the old car, do you drive it until one day you get in it and the engine doesn't start, or do you try to trade it while it's still runnable and not full of rust holes? I think that would be the big thing for the Capitals is if you wait all the way until the end, it's too late. I mean, you got to think in your heart of hearts that the Capitals probably wished that they moved Nicklas Backstrom before he's in the position that he's in right now, because they're getting nothing for him. If you could move someone like an Oshie, or if you could move someone like a Nick Dowd, something like that, even though they're loved, I hear all that, you're going to get a tremendous return. And those returns are already getting diminished because these are players are on the wrong side of 30, that kind of thing. That, I think that's the Hail Mary pass, that if we get desperate, we'll trade this guy. Well, that guy, he's a diminished goods. I'm going to say TJ Oshie, a dynamic player, but you would have got a lot more for TJ Oshie, say 3 years ago, than say you tried to trade him next season. Difficult questions. I'm talking about longevity and long-term sustainability in the National Hockey League. So I get that the team is one that got them where they're at right now. I get it. So there's going to be the naysayers that are like, Dan, why do they need to blow it up? Don't try to fix it if it ain't broke. Listen, this Capitals team is doing well, but they're not firing on all cylinders. They're not as good as, say, like I said, the Bruins or the Vegas Golden Knights or fill in the blank team that's playing really good right now. And that is what needs to be addressed. But I'm talking about in years to come. We've finally made good and started adding younger players from Hershey. I think they still need a top tier forward or two to take the Caps over the top. One of the things that was not addressed that Brian McClellan said that he was going to do that hasn't done, and I don't think it's for a lack of trying, I don't think anyway, is that he said he wanted to get that top 6 forward, and it just hasn't happened yet. Who is that player? And ultimately, I think that the asking price was probably too much, or the teams that were interested were looking at some of our prospects that Brian McClellan's like, I'm not going to pass. I'm not going to move these players. So a difficult position, and sometimes you have to be willing to take a bite and swallow that pill of, I'm going to give up a prospect to maybe get a bundled return. A difficult position, but I think something that the Capitals need to address. Take a look at the teams that do it the best. When I'm talking about top 6 scoring forwards, think of Edmonton and all their goal scoring, and Toronto. We saw how they played against the Capitals recently, and also Carolina, all teams that have a lot of scoring weaponry. The Capitals do have some, but I think that they are still a far cry from, like, say, an Edmonton, a Toronto, or Carolina. And even if they do have those, most of the players like Toronto that I mentioned, it's younger talent. Not the youngest in the league, but younger talent. That Alex Ovechkin is doing well. Dylan Strome is a dynamic player, but I think this team can still stand to improve. Now, I'm not here to disparage and say that this is a poor team. Don't get that as you walk away from this podcast. What I'm saying is you need to have your eyes up on the horizon, thinking about the future. It's not necessarily about adding all young players, but the right players to get the Caps where they want to get and where they were in their heyday. And the heyday I'm talking about, when they made it to the playoffs year after year after year after year. That is the Capitals that I want to see return to prominence again. I think that it is possible. They're just going to have to get aggressive, I think, this offseason. So coming up, it is going to be a busy week for the Capitals as they take on the Sabres. They're going to take on the Penguins, and it's not going to be easy sledding, and then also the Hurricanes. So that's what I'm talking about. It's crunch time, and it does appear that, at least as I record this now, the Capitals are in a good position to make it to the playoffs. But the question now is, what do they do if they make it to the first round? Will they fan out in a hurry? And if that is the case, that kind of exemplifies what I'm talking about in bolstering this lineup. Tough schedule ahead. The Sabres, not one of the better teams this year, but definitely not one that you want to go into and enter into a trap game. I do expect the Penguins will be out for blood, and we do know that the Carolina Hurricanes are a really good hockey team. So I think the Capitals better pack a lunch. It's going to be tough sledding for this team. I ultimately think they're up for it, but it's not going to be easy. Listen, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Washington Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are ultimately what makes this show successful. When you're done here, head on over to Locked On's 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holney, and I'll talk to you again next time.